How far along is she? The question hung in the air, sharp and unforgiving. He felt the room close in as glances shifted and silence grew heavy. In that moment, he realized a hidden truth was about to unravel everything they believed was safe. I never forget that evening, the one where she suddenly reappeared at the hospital after nearly a year of vanishing without a word. I'm Ethan, 26 years old, a night shift anesthesia technician at a community hospital on the outskirts of Los Angeles. My life has been pretty straightforward. Long shifts monitoring equipment, prepping for surgeries, and crashing in my small apartment downtown when the sun comes up. No fancy degrees, no big ambitions, just a guy who found solace in the steady hum of hospital machines after dropping out of community college a few years back. I live alone, grab takeout from the corner diner, and occasionally hit the gym to shake off the exhaustion. It's simple, predictable, and that's how I like it. Or at least that's how it was until she showed up again. I was in the supply room, restocking IV lines and checking oxygen masks under the fluorescent lights, when my pager buzzed with an emergency call from the ER. Pregnant female, severe abdominal pain, unstable BP, need tech support stat. I grabbed my kit and jogged down the hall, the familiar chaos of beeping monitors and hurried voices pulling me in. ER nights are always intense, but this one felt routine until I pushed through the swinging doors and saw her. There on the gurney, writhing in pain, sweat beading on her forehead, was Olivia, the woman who'd been my head nurse, my quiet confidant during those endless night shifts a year ago. The one I'd fallen for in silence and sharing coffee breaks and whispered stories in the dim break room. The one who'd disappeared after our medical outreach trip to rural areas in Western California, leaving without a note, a call, or even a goodbye. And now here she was, 9 months pregnant, clutching her swollen belly as another contraction hit. My heart slammed against my ribs. I froze in the doorway, the crash cart in my hand suddenly feeling like lead. "Ethan?" Her voice was a ragged whisper, her eyes widening in shock as they locked onto mine. Pain twisted her features, but the recognition was immediate, raw. She doubled over again, gasping, her knuckles white against the bed rails. The ER doc barked orders, "Get her stabilized! BP's dropping!" Snapping me back. I moved on autopilot, hooking up the monitors, adjusting the oxygen flow, my hands steady from years of practice, but my mind a whirlwind. How? Why now? And the baby? God, the timeline. As I worked beside the team, injecting meds to steady her vitals, fragments of that last night flooded back. The outreach clinic in the middle of nowhere, rain pounding the tin roof, locals offering homemade moonshine to warm us up. Olivia had taken a sip, her cheeks flushing in the cold. We'd been alone in the makeshift quarters, talking late into the night about everything, her failed marriage, my aimless life, the weight of always being the strong one. Her eyes had been tired, vulnerable, and I'd pulled her close without thinking. One moment of weakness, of connection, that blurred every line we'd carefully drawn. And then she was gone the next morning. I'd searched for weeks, calls to other hospitals, messages to mutual colleagues. Nothing. I'd convinced myself it was regret, that she'd run from what happened between us. But now, seeing her here, the pieces slammed together like a puzzle I didn't want to solve. The doc leaned in, voice urgent. "Ma'am, do you know the father's name? We need medical history. Any allergies, conditions?" Olivia's eyes flicked to mine for a split second, then away. She bit her lip, another contraction ripping through her. He wouldn't believe it if he knew," she murmured, so low only I could hear. Her words hit like a gut punch. The room spun. I gripped the IV stand to steady myself, my pulse roaring in my ears. Wouldn't believe it? Or wouldn't want it? The implication burned. If the baby was mine and the math screamed it was, then she'd carried this secret alone, thinking I couldn't handle it. Or worse, that I wouldn't. I forced myself to focus, assisting as they prepped for an emergency C-section. Her hand brushed mine accidentally during a transfer, and she squeezed it, desperate, fleeting. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears mixing with sweat. "Sorry for what? Leaving? Hiding? Or for dragging me back into this mess?" My throat tightened. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but the OR doors loomed and she was wheeled away. I stood there in the empty bay, the echo of her cries fading, my scrubs damp with sweat that wasn't from the rush. Pacing the hall later, I leaned against the cold wall, head in hands. 9 months. She'd been out there alone, dealing with morning sickness, doctor's visits, the fear of complications, all while I'd been here, drowning in what-ifs, assuming she'd ghosted me out of shame. But now, this changed everything. If that child was mine, I wasn't just some young tech scraping by, I was a father. The weight crushed me, fear of screwing it up, anger at her silence, and beneath it all, a fierce protectiveness I hadn't known I had. How could she think I'd run? How could she bear this without me? When they brought her back post-op, stable but exhausted, I slipped into the recovery room. The baby, a boy, tiny and perfect, was in the bassinet nearby. She stirred, eyes fluttering open. "Ethan?" Her voice broke. I took her hand, my resolve hardening. "I'm not going anywhere. This time, I'm here." I stood by her bedside in the recovery room, my hand still clasping hers as if letting go would make her disappear all over again. The contraction had subsided for now, but her face was etched with exhaustion, her breaths shallow and labored. Her eyes darted away from mine, like just meeting my gaze would shatter whatever walls she'd built over the past year. I swallowed hard, my voice coming out rough and strained. "How long have you been pregnant, Olivia?" I asked it like I was ripping off a bandage, knowing full well it would hurt us both. Deep down, I already suspected the answer, but hearing it would make everything real. Too real. She drew in a sharp breath, her fingers tightening around the bedsheet, and whispered so faintly it was almost lost in the hum of the machines. 9 months and a week. The words hit me like a freight train. 9 months and a week. The math aligned perfectly, terrifyingly, with that stormy night in the rural outreach clinic out west. The night we'd crossed every boundary we'd sworn to uphold, as colleagues, as professionals, as people fighting our own demons. It had been our last shift together on that trip, miles from the city, surrounded by endless fields and pouring rain. The locals had insisted on sharing their homemade brew to celebrate the end of the week, a strong, earthy liquor that warmed us against the chill. Olivia had taken a small sip, her cheeks flushing as she laughed off the burn. We'd ended up alone in the cramped quarters, the rain drumming on the roof like a relentless heartbeat. We'd talked for hours that night, about her ex-husband who'd left her feeling broken, about my dead-end job and the family I barely spoke to anymore. Her eyes had been red from the cold, her hair damp and clinging to her face as she stood on the porch. "Ethan, do you ever wonder," she'd said softly, turning to me, "what life would be like if we didn't have to run, to hide, to always be the strong ones?" I hadn't answered with words. I just stepped closer, pulling her inside out of the rain, and everything had unraveled from there. It wasn't planned, wasn't some grand romance. It was a moment of raw vulnerability, two lonely people finding solace in each other amid the isolation. Beautiful in its mistake, but heavy with regret the morning after. When I woke up, she was gone. No note, no explanation. Just her nurse's jacket draped over the chair and an empty space beside me. I'd panicked, searching the clinic, calling her phone until it went straight to voicemail. I asked around the other staff. Nothing. She'd vanished like a ghost. For weeks, I'd hunted for any sign. Emails to regional hospitals, messages to shared contacts, zilch. I'd forced myself to believe she'd regretted it, that she'd fled because of me. Maybe she hated what happened or hated herself for it. But now, hearing 9 months and a week, I knew the truth was far more complicated and painful. I leaned in closer, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and desperation. "The baby?" I couldn't finish the sentence, but she knew. She closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her temple, and turned her face away, as if looking at me would break her completely. "Don't ask," she whispered. "You'll hate me." My chest tightened like a vice. Hate her? I couldn't. I was hurt, yeah, devastated that she'd carried this burden alone, but hate? No. The pain was from imagining her out there, month after month, dealing with the nausea, the doctor's appointments, the swelling feet, all without a word to me. From realizing I'd let her slip away without fighting harder to keep her. I gripped her hand tighter, my voice dropping to a plea. "Why didn't you tell me?" She gasped through another wave of pain, but her answer cut deeper than any contraction. Because you're young. You have your whole life ahead. I didn't want to drag you into something you might not be ready for. I stared at her, the words choking me. Young? Sure, at 26, I was still figuring out my own mess. Bills piling up in my tiny apartment, shifts that left me bone-tired, no real family to fall back on. But that didn't mean I couldn't handle this. I'd always seen love as something distant, a luxury for people with stable lives. Me? I was just the night shift guy scraping by in a world of beeps and sterile halls. But standing there amid the antiseptic smell and the faint cries from down the hall, I realized love wasn't about being ready. It was about showing up when everything screamed to run. Another contraction hit and she bit her lip, her nails digging into my palm. In that instant, I saw it all. Not just the physical agony, but the war inside her, the fear of judgment, of abandonment, of being seen as a burden. She'd fought alone because she thought that's what strength looked like. But I didn't want her strength if it meant pushing me away. I leaned down, my forehead brushing hers, and whispered like a vow I hadn't known I could make. I'm not going anywhere. This time, I'm here. The surgery went smoothly. The baby boy came into the world crying strong and healthy, his tiny fists waving, as the nurses wrapped him in a blanket. They whisked him off for checks while Olivia was moved to the ICU recovery room, monitors beeping steadily around her. I didn't leave the hallway that night. I slumped on a hard plastic bench staring at the linoleum floor, my scrubs wrinkled, and my mind a storm I couldn't quiet. Every hour or so, a nurse would update me. Vitals stable, no complications, but it did nothing to ease the knot in my chest. Morning came slow, the hospital shifting from night quiet to daytime bustle. I splashed water on my face in the staff bathroom, trying to shake the fog, then slipped into her room. She was awake, propped up slightly, her face pale under the harsh lights, eyes rimmed red from lack of sleep. When she saw me, she turned her head away, gazing at the blank wall like it held all the answers. I stood there, the silence thick and suffocating, like the air before a storm. Finally, I found my voice, rough from the all-nighter. How long were you planning to hide this from me? It came out sharper than I meant, laced with the hurt I'd been bottling up. She gripped the white blanket tighter, her knuckles blanching. Her eyes stayed fixed on the window where fog blurred the outside world. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she answered, each word slicing into me like glass. You're young, Ethan. You have a future. Your family. They'd think I did this on purpose. I didn't want to be a burden. I didn't want pity from anyone. I went still, the words echoing in my head. A burden? Pity? There were 100 things swirling inside me, hurt, anger, sorrow, even a flash of betrayal. But overriding it all was this deep, aching pity, not for her situation, but for how she saw herself. I pitied that she believed she was some weight I'd resent carrying. That after everything we'd shared, those late-night talks in the break room, the quiet support during tough shifts, she thought her pain made her unworthy. I clenched my fists, fighting back the urge to snap. I don't need anyone's pity, and I've never pitied you, I said, my voice cracking. I just regret not being there when you needed me most. She bit her lip, a single tear tracing down her cheek to soak into the pillow. You'll be fine, she murmured, like she was convincing herself more than me. One day, you'll forget about me. You'll meet someone your age with family who approves, a clear path ahead. And me? I'm just an accident, a scar in your life. I snapped then, my voice rising sharper than I intended. Don't talk like you don't deserve to be loved. The words hung in the air, raw and desperate, but she just smiled. A faint, resigned curve of her lips, like she'd already accepted every bad ending life could throw at her. I turned away, unable to watch her push me out of her world like that. My steps echoed as I left the room, each one feeling like I was walking on broken glass. The hallway blurred through unshed tears, the sterile smell choking me. That night, back in my apartment, I couldn't sleep. The place felt emptier than ever. The single bed unmade, takeout containers piled in the sink, the hum of the fridge mocking my solitude. I pulled out the ultrasound photo the doc had printed earlier, the baby curled up, his little hand over his face. I stared at it, pressing a hand to my chest, feeling hollow. It wasn't because she didn't need me. It was because she believed she wasn't worth needing, and I had no idea how to change that belief, how to convince her that her strength didn't mean she had to suffer alone. I thought about my own family, my parents back in the small town up north, who'd freak if they knew, about my coworkers, the whispers that would follow if word got out. But none of that mattered next to her pain. It paled against the image of her out there, pregnant and isolated, thinking she was protecting me by shutting me out. The regret gnawed at me. If I'd fought harder a year ago, if I'd chased her down instead of letting her go. But regrets don't change anything, they just deepen the ache. I hadn't gone back to Olivia's room right after that confrontation. The words she'd thrown at me, calling herself an accident, a scar, had hit too hard, stirring up a storm I needed to weather alone. I paced my apartment that night, the rain tapping against the window like an accusation. How could she think so little of herself, of us? But deep down, I knew pushing her wouldn't fix it. I had to show up differently, without demands or anger. So I gave myself space, a day to breathe, to remind myself that love wasn't about winning arguments. The next shift dragged on, a blur of prepping patients and monitoring vitals. When it ended, the sky opened up again, rain sheeting down like it had that night in the outreach clinic. I stopped at the hospital cafeteria on my way out, grabbing a hot milk. Simple, no frills. No bouquet of flowers to prove a point. No grand gesture. Just something warm, something thoughtful, and a heart that felt battered but unbreakable. I needed her to see I wasn't here out of obligation. I was here because I chose to be. I pushed open her door quietly, the room bathed in the soft glow of a bedside lamp casting shadows over the bassinet. She was sitting up a bit, cradling the baby in her arms, feeding him. When she looked up and saw me, her expression flickered. Surprise, then wariness. But she didn't turn away this time. Progress, maybe. I set the milk on the side table, my hands steadier than I felt. "Brought this for you," I said softly, not moving closer until she nodded faintly. She glanced at the cup, then back at me, her eyes searching mine like she was waiting for the catch. I pulled up the chair beside her bed, close but not crowding. The silence stretched, broken only by the baby's soft suckling and the muffled rain outside. Finally, I met her gaze head-on and said what I'd rehearsed in my head a dozen times. I don't need a title. I don't need my name on the birth certificate. But I want to be here. To do whatever it takes. As long as you let me. She went still, her free hand tightening around the blanket. For what felt like an eternity, maybe 10 seconds, maybe a minute, she said nothing. Then, in a voice hoarse from fatigue and emotion, "Why?" I drew in a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "Because seeing you try to do this alone, it kills me. I can't just walk away knowing I could have been there. And because I've already lost too much time." She stared at me, her eyes probing, like she was hunting for any hint of insincerity, any crack in my resolve. I'd seen that look before, back when we first started opening up during those night shifts, her guarding her heart after her marriage fell apart. But there was nothing to find but truth. I didn't advance, didn't reach out to touch her. I just sat there, exposed, letting her decide. And then, her lips pressed together, and she gave a small, trembling nod. It was barely perceptible, but it shattered something inside her. The wall she'd built to protect herself, to keep from being a burden. For the first time in what felt like forever, she let herself be vulnerable, her shoulders sagging as a quiet sob escaped. I moved then, gently taking her hand under the covers. We sat like that, the three of us in the dim room, her feeding our son, me holding space, the rain a steady rhythm outside. No words for a while, just the sound of the IV drip, the occasional coo from the baby, and our synced breathing. It was the beginning of healing, not in grand declarations, but in the quiet act of staying. That night, I didn't leave. I stayed in that uncomfortable chair pulled up to her bed, our fingers intertwined beneath the sheet. She drifted off eventually, her grip loosening in sleep, but I kept watch. Because I knew now, admissions aren't always in "I love yous." Sometimes they're in the simple plea, "Let me stay?" And in her nod, she'd given me permission to start mending what had been broken. As the hours ticked by, I thought about how we'd gotten here, the outreach trip, the rain-soaked night, her disappearance. It wasn't a fairy tale, it was messy, full of regrets and unspoken fears. But in that room, with our son between us, it felt like a turning point. We'd both been running from pain, from vulnerability. Now we were choosing to stand still, together. A few weeks after Olivia was discharged, I made it a habit to stop by her place regularly. No set schedule, no obligations, just showing up when I could. Her apartment was a modest two-bedroom in a quiet suburb east of LA with faded blue curtains and a small balcony overlooking a patch of grass. Some days I'd bring a loaf of bread from the bakery near the hospital and a fresh coffee. Others, it'd be a pair of tiny sneakers I'd snagged on sale from a thrift store downtown. Nothing extravagant. I wasn't trying to buy my way in. I just wanted her to know I was there, steady and real. We didn't label what we had. No talks about us or the future. It was enough to sit on her couch while she nursed the baby, or help with the dishes, after a simple dinner of pasta and salad. The boy, we'd named him Noah after her grandfather, had her eyes wide and curious, and my dark hair. Holding him felt surreal, like a piece of that rainy night had come full circle. Olivia would watch me sometimes, her expression softening, but she never pushed for more. And I didn't either. We were both healing, one quiet moment at a time. That afternoon stands out clearest. The sun was dipping low, casting a golden haze over everything. I just finished a day shift and swung by unannounced. Noah was fussy, so I scooped him up and stepped out onto the balcony for some fresh air. The breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass from the neighbor's yard, and I bounced him gently, humming an old lullaby my mom used to sing. Olivia was out there too, watering a few potted herbs on the railing. Basil and rosemary she'd planted to make the place feel more like home. Her hair was tied back loosely, no makeup, just in a simple t-shirt and jeans. She looked peaceful in a way I hadn't seen before, the lines of worry smoothed out by the light. I turned to her, the sun slanting across her cheekbones, and something in me shifted. For the first time, I let the words I'd been holding back spill out, soft but sure. If you'll let me, one day I'd like to take you and Noah home with me. Not because I have to, but because I love you. She froze mid-pour, the watering can tipping slightly before she set it down. Her eyes met mine, searching again, but this time without the old doubt, without the walls. The silence stretched, filled only by Noah's contented gurgles and the distant hum of traffic. Then her lips trembled and she nodded, just a small, deliberate dip of her chin. A tear slipped down her cheek, catching the light, but it wasn't from sadness. It was relief, the kind that comes when you finally realize you're not fighting alone anymore. I stepped closer, resting my hand on her shoulder. No rush, no pressure. We stood there like that, the three of us, framed by the fading daylight and the whisper of wind through the leaves. Noah reached out a chubby hand toward her, and she took it, her fingers brushing mine in the process. Peace settled over us, the kind that time seems to slow for. No one uttered the word family, but it hung in the air, growing roots in that little balcony space. And in my head, I whispered to myself, I never thought love would come like this. No roses, no candlelit dinners, no dramatic confessions. Just being there. Not leaving, day after day. We didn't rush into anything after that. Weeks turned to months. And I started staying over more, helping with late-night feedings, sharing quiet mornings over coffee while Noah played on a blanket. Olivia opened up slowly, telling me about the months she'd spent alone in a small town up north, hiding from judgment, from me. I thought I was protecting you, she'd say, her voice still laced with regret. And I'd pull her close. You don't have to protect me anymore. We're in this together. Eventually, we made it official in the smallest way, moving her things into my apartment, turning the spare room into a nursery with hand-me-down cribs and fresh paint. No big wedding, no announcements. Just us, building something real from the ashes of what could have been a regret. Noah's first steps happened on our living room floor, his laughter filling the space like sunlight. And every time I look at them, Olivia reading him a book, or the two of them napping in the afternoon quiet, I feel it. This is what love looks like when it's earned, not chased. It's not perfect. There are still tough days, fights over shifts, worries about money, the shadow of what-ifs. But we face them side by side. And that's enough, more than enough.